Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. I'm Ben, and today I'm going to be installing the Camel ADV one-finger clutch kit on my Gen 3 KLR 650 back there. Now, if you want to see the professionals install this, they've got a great install video over on the Camel ADV website. I'm going to get this thing installed quick and just kind of show you how it goes, and then we'll take the Gen 3 KLR 650 out to ride some off-road trails to see just how much that 25 to 30% reduction in clutch pull weight helps me out. In the kit, we're going to get this new actuator lever as well as some hardware to connect the end of the clutch cable to it. And because this section is going to be a little bit longer, we need to redirect where that clutch cable is angled. So this is a new bracket that is going to hold the end of that cable, as well as a new stud and serrated nut that goes on top of this to keep it attached to the case. So if we look over at the bike then, that means we're going to be removing this piece as well as this whole assembly here. Now, even though it doesn't look like it now, I did clean the bike up yesterday in preparation for this. However, I did notice there is still a little bit of grit down in sort of the V of the seal here. I might be able to get this out and the new one in without having any issues here, but just because I'm a bit paranoid about dropping any dirt particles down into the engine, I'm gonna get my compressor fired up and just blow some of this out of here. But of course, I'm gonna be careful not to actually shoot anything down past that seal. So with that all cleaned up, now we can get this piece removed, but first we've got to get the cable disconnected. So I've got a set of locking pliers here with some electrical tape wrapped around the teeth so we don't hurt the cable at all. So I'm going to get that rubber grommet pulled back, give myself a little bit of room, pinch down. Then we'll use a little bit of mechanical advantage here to actuate that and get this out. Now with that removed, we can turn this to the side a bit, so we are somewhere kind of in that neighborhood. And then without applying too much force, just kind of work it back and forth. Once we get to about here, you're going to notice that it gets a little bit stuck on the seal. I'm just going to kind of gently work our way out of there without doing any damage to that seal, because there are some sharp parts on here. That's a little strange. On the end of this, we've got some chips that are actually loose there, and the only reason I noticed that is because when I was looking at my seal here, there's actually a little bit of a metal flake at about, what, 1 o'clock there. So I think I'll probably try to clean that up without knocking anything in there, and then we'll stick some paper towel down in there to make sure nothing falls in. So next we've got to get this little boot pulled off of the end of the cable. So I'm going to shoot a little bit of lubricant on here to make this easier. The cord's right, this is the worst part of the install. Ugh. So now with that removed, we can work on pulling this out, and I think this is going to be the point where we're actually just going to have to pull the oil filler out and put a piece of paper towel in there. If you're somebody that rides off-road a lot, anytime you take this cap off, be cautious, because you can get little particles of sand up underneath it. And of course, when you go to pull this off, it can fall right into the motor. So be aware of that every time you go to remove this, and make sure you get that cleaned up before you stick it back on. This side too, a big old piece of dirt right there. Don't put that in your motor. With that cleaned up, we can get that sort of capped off here. And we should be able to get our wrench on here. And go ahead and spin that all the way off. Get this old cable stay pulled off. There we go. We're actually going to be replacing that bolt with this little Allen stud instead. I've got some blue Loctite on here already, so we'll get that threaded down in place. Get that threaded down just to about where it stops, and then just snug it up with the Allen wrench. Feels good. Now I'll grab the new bracket and slip it over the clutch cable before I get it installed. And now supposedly because this is a serrated nut, this doesn't need Loctite, but I put Loctite on everything. So we're gonna put some Loctite on it. So here again, definitely does not need to be super tight. Of course, we want it snug down, but this is a tiny little fastener that's going on. I'll just call that good. Might as well get rid of a little bit of Loctite that I had left on my little Loctite applicator here. Now, obviously, since we're changing some geometry here, there may need to be some adjustments happening here. This will also be a handy thing to know how to do when you have too much slack up top at the clutch lever. And essentially what moving these nuts one way or the other is going to do is either shove the whole cable a little bit closer to the adjuster, which would give you more slack, or it's going to pull it away a little bit farther, creating less slack. But since I didn't move this one at all to begin with, I don't think I should be too far off, but I'm not going to tighten this down until I get everything reassembled and can test where my slack is at. So now we're almost to the point where we can stick this in, but first we've got to get the little clutch cable holder on the end of it. With the slot facing the bike, we'll get this stuck on here. Drop the pin down in from the top. And we'll locate our little hole on the bottom and stick the pin through. Get those ends flared out. There we go. And then before I stick this in, I'm just going to double check to make sure that I've got this oriented correctly, which I do, because we want that face towards the bike. So then I can pull this out and get this installed. And before I try to shove this into that seal, I'm going to get this good and oiled up with some engine oil, just to make sure lessen any friction that's going to happen there. And we're going to have to be very, very careful about this edge here because that is sharp. We don't want to mess our seal up. Put a little bit on there too. So then again, we're going to kind of want to orient this somewhere in this neighborhood and just kind of gently guide it in there. Just sort of testing a little bit at a time to see what feels right. If you are pushing too hard, you are doing something wrong. Just get that set in there, wiggle it around. Yeah, and it should more or less just drop in there. So we'll get to about here. And then should start to turn here somewhere. So I think I came back a little bit this way. Felt like there was something we needed to fit around in there. And then once we get close to the rubber piece here, we should be able to turn this. There we go. And now, of course, we're to the annoying part again here where this has got to get installed back on to the clutch cable. I think I'm going to pull this out and probably get my pliers on it. There we go. So with that in place, we'll move that back to a point where we can grab the cable on the outside. Ooh, look at that. Extra little bit of leverage. Let me do it by hand there. Seems like we definitely still have some play there, and I can hear the lever rattling around up top. We can take a look at that in a second. I think I'm actually going to grab my clutch lever up here. That's pulled tight and push that on there. So that grommet is then pushed tight on top of the smaller diameter portion of the pin. Originally, I was going to adjust a bunch of slack out of the cable down here and then leave a bunch of adjustment up top at the clutch lever. But I think because I've only got a couple threads from the factory here to stick this little grommet on, and this bike does see a lot of mud and water, so I think I'm just going to kind of cover that up and leave it right there, and I will just snug this up and make all my adjustments up top here in a second. I'll just get these tight. There we are. Now before I stick my cap back on, I pulled the little O-ring that sits in here out, and I'm just cleaning everything up real good to make sure there's no debris left in here or on my O-ring. And per the owner's manual, I'm gonna stick a little bit of this waterproof grease all along the perimeter. That'll just kind of help keep the oil in and everything else out. And it'll also kind of act as a lubricant when we're tightening this seal down to the bike. Of course, before we do that, we're gonna have to pull this off. As long as that stayed clean, should be all set to put the plug back in. I did actually plan on doing this right before I changed the motor oil for the season, because as careful as I was, I'm sure there is still a chance that we could have knocked something in there during this process. And the plan is to just run this a bit and hope that the oil filter picks up anything that we dropped in there out, and then get some new oil and a new filter in. As long as everything looks good down there, move up to the clutch lever. Now to get any unwanted slop between the lever and the perch there pulled out, we're just gonna crack the adjuster nut loose here and then pull this out that way, and that's essentially going to be pulling that pin inside of the clutch this way. And I think we now probably got a little bit too much slack pulled out. We want about the thickness of a nickel or a quarter in between the lever and there. So that is a little bit too tight. If that's the case, then we just thread this in a little bit, and you can probably watch the lever actually moving as I do it. Let's see how that looks. We'll give the lever a pull, slowly release, and then check our gap. Let's see exactly what that did for us here. Yeah, that is definitely a noticeable difference. But of course, pulling that 3 or 4 times in the garage isn't really going to give me a good feel for how that's actually going to affect its performance and my hand's performance out on the trail. So let's saddle up, get this thing out on some messy trails, and see how this feels. All right, so we are here at the Tigerton Off-Road Park, and we're going to hit the single track, and we'll see just how well this thing's going to help me out. Hopefully the 360 camera stays attached. Did lose one for the first time the other day. These trails are a bit tight. It's probably, oh, foot peg, a bad decision. Oh my gosh, this got a lot more rocky since last time. So we will keep one finger on the clutch there just to be ready. Probably gonna need it. Yep, there it is. This thing is a lot bouncier than I remember. Need to get the KLR some proper suspension for stuff like this. I think most people would probably not, well, maybe they would dream of it, but wouldn't dream of actually doing this on a KLR. Not that I'm going fast, I know. People could ride circles around me, but still, this isn't the average KLR rider's destination. Yet I think there are a number of people out there like me. I really should have done some practice before this. Oh, it's been a while. I think there's definitely other people out there that are interested in pushing the limits of this bike off-road, and I know a lot of people call it a big heavy pig, and like I said, would never dream of doing this stuff, but when you're able to reduce your fatigue load even just a little bit, and especially for stuff like this, just being able to literally use one finger, and I'm not gonna try to show you that I'm using one. You're just gonna have to either see it out of the corner of the camera's eye or take my word for it, but that's what I'm doing. And with a 460-pound bike with gear and a rider on it, you need all the control you can get, and especially if you're gonna go this slow, you're gonna need to ride that clutch a little bit. Did I turn the radio on? What's going on here? What? How did that happen? Must have ran up against it. Yeah, so having that extra couple of fingers on the bars, since you only need one for the clutch, is super nice, because then you have control over this giant machine, or at least a little bit more control. You can pretend to. And yet you can still work the clutch around when you need to keep it moving, because of course that is the, wow, glad I got my MX boots on. That is the most important part of any off-roading scenario, is just to keep moving, because that in itself is going to help reduce fatigue. Oh, one thing I guess I should mention while I give myself a break here is that I did end up feeling, even now, like I have a little bit too much slack here, and because we increased the length of that lever down there, we also increased the friction zone of the clutch. So you have to assume that it's going to start to pick up a little bit sooner, and I had to actually take some slack out down here, and so now that little grommet is still just grabbing just a few threads down there, so that gave me a little bit more room for adjustment up here. I've got just about as much play, I think, out of here as I feel comfortable with as I twist a little bit more out, because I mean this thing is basically at the end of its adjustment almost. Oh, I need a drink. It's like 80 degrees. Woo, and I got my Voyager pants on, and I'm not moving, which is not good. Woo. So obviously we are in a bit of an extreme situation here. Like I said, most people probably don't have this destination in mind when they're modding their KLR, but if you do, or even if you're just going to ride slightly hairy trails that require a little bit of clutch work, again, obviously the more of a break you can give yourself. That was a bad time. Saved it, sort of. Oh, skid plate. Hopefully skid plate. The harder you're working, you know, and the longer you're riding, the easier your hands are going to get wore out. And, you know, I mean, I'm sure there's people out there, oh, you know, the clutch doesn't blend that hard, you're a wimp. No, I just don't want to have something like a sore hand slow me down at all, you know. The point of riding for me is not to show that I can pull a clutch lever in, even if it's not as easy as it can be. It's to make everything as easy and enjoyable as possible, so I can see what I can make this bike do otherwise. So for me anyways, little things like that can definitely make a big difference. And honestly, I mean, my right hand is more wore out than my left after that. I mean, there's some fatigue from grabbing the bar, but honestly, I don't think there's any from grabbing that clutch. I mean, you could easily do that one finger for a decent part of a ride like that. Maybe you eventually have to move up to two fingers, because just one is going to get a little wore out a little quicker. So for me anyways, I would say this is definitely a worthwhile mod, and if you're somebody that has ever felt even just a little bit of fatigue in your clutch hand when you're trying to ride off-road trails, I would say go ahead and get this switched out. Give yourself a little bit of a break and focus on the ride and the terrain, not your sore clutch hand. Thanks for watching, guys. If this video was helpful to you at all, if you enjoyed it, make sure and give it a like. Let me know down in the comment section. If you want to see more action on the KLR and more of the beautiful Wisconsin woods and more bike mods, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I try to put videos out like this at least once a week. So make sure you subscribe, click the bell, and we'll see you in the next video. Take care, stay safe, stay swanky, get out, enjoy this beautiful world any chance you get. And if you can't do that right now, here's some more videos to check out in the meantime.